And I think as Brits and Americans and in the West, my appeal and my understanding is we have, alhamdulillah, it's a blessing from Allah, even as minorities, the potential to make huge impact, not only in the society that we live in, but also across the world. Because these societies, these countries wield a huge amount of influence. And these are also part of the ummah. The only difference between me and you and them is that we've accepted, inshallah, the message. They haven't. The imam is someone who's cultured, who's learned, because when people see the imam at the front, Shah Waliullah Dehlavi talks about the first sub should be the elite.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode of Sultans and Sneakers. I'm your host, as always, Maheen the podcaster. And on today's episode, I've got visiting all the way from Blackburn, England, Maulana Haroon Sidat. Maulana Sabs, thank you for coming on the show. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And welcome to Chicago for the first time.
Yeah, chilly Chicago.
It's not even that cold yet.
I know, for us it is.
Yeah?
It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, well, appreciate you taking some time today, to come on the show. I want to... how's your trip to America been so far?
America, as we call it.
Yeah,
it's been good so far.
Yeah,
I've not had any issues. I landed in Houston,
okay,
San Antonio, friendly, no issues. Everybody was saying hello. Well, it's actually
howdy.
Howdy. It was another phrase they use. How y'all doing? How y'all doing?
Okay.
So I didn't buy any cowboy shoes, but
okay.
It was lovely, very hospitable.
Okay.
The weather's great down there, and the people are genuinely very friendly.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice.
So you're here for like a conference, right?
I was here for a conference. It's the largest conference when it comes to religion in the world. It's called the American Academy of Religion Conference. It happens every year, and 8,000 to 10,000 academics on different aspects of all religions come. They present papers, talk about their books, maybe. So it's really good opportunity to rub shoulders with people who are thinking about religion in the world today.
Cool, interesting. So, first of all, I actually had you had messaged me, was it like last week? Was it or 2 weeks ago around that time?
Yes.
We have a mutual friend, Mizan Raja. Shout out to Mizan from the UK. He's like, hey, my man Maulana Haroon's going to be in town, so take care of him.
Yeah.
But many of my audience probably won't be familiar with you, right? Well, can you talk a little bit? Tell us a little bit where you're from and your background and all that.
Yeah, so I'm from the UK, as you can tell, and I was born and bred in the UK. My lineage goes back to Gujarat, which is West India, Indian Ocean, a famous area known for its trade in particular, but also for scholarship. In terms of hadith scholarship in particular, my granddad came here, my father came, my mum came afterwards. So I'm pretty much British born. And I went through the schooling system as most Brits go through. I live in the north of England, which to our southern friends is the savage land. But I live in the north of England. I did my GCSEs, memorized the Qu'ran. In our culture, you have to memorize the Qu'ran. It's a rite of passage to being accepted as a son to your father. So my dad was very keen on making sure that you'd memorize the Quran. And then I did what's called the Darsi-i Nizami syllabus, very famous Mughal era syllabus, if you like. And then I had a moment where I decided that I needed to improve my socio-economic circumstances coming from a working class family. So I went to university afterwards, after studying a little bit elsewhere. My degree was in economics and finance. My passion for economics actually came from my A-levels. I had a wonderful teacher who taught me economics, and I just fell in love with the subject because it was real world understanding. So you learn about inflation, interest rates, monetary policy, fiscal policy, all of the stuff that actually impacts you on a day-to-day basis. And economics is what makes, in an unscientific way, the world go around,
right?
If you like. So my degree was in economics. Alhamdulillah, I did quite well in the degree. And then I worked for a consultancy firm in tax consultancy, where we try to help corporates become tax efficient. I think that's the word.
Save more money, more loopholes.
Save money, become efficient. So a lot of the clients were actually based in the US.
Okay.
So I had a lot of exposure to the United States. I did that for a while. Then I met my wife. As you know, corporate life is quite consuming. And for a Muslim who's at least confessional in his outlook, it can be quite challenging.
Right.
So I decided that I wanted to do something else with my life. And so, because I had a wife who was very supportive, and she understood that marriage isn't just all about your husband having lots of letters before and after his name, but actually being a real husband. I had a career change. So I went from quantitative background, i.e. numbers and mathematics, to a qualitative background. So it was a whole reframing of my world. And then I did a PhD in the area of religion philosophy and theology. My PhD looked at a number of things, but one of them was looking at madrasas in Britain, what are called seminaries,
Sure.
higher level education. So I did that. I worked at the same time, or volunteered at the same time as an imam at a small prayer room that was growing and developing where I live. It's becoming a mosque now, inshallah ta'ala. And then I continued into postdoc. So we did a project looking at it's the largest ever research on imams in Britain. And then I continue to write and research and teach and do as much as I can to serve the community.
Right.
And recently I've entered the rather freakish world of social media.
Okay.
So that's a farz kifaya, I think, for some of us to be involved in that space.
Yeah.
But that Islam is very different sometimes to Islam that's the day-to-day Islam that takes place in the mosque.
Right. You did your undergraduate secular studies in England.
That's right.
Okay. And then your PhD also in England.
England, yes.
I see. Okay. So what's your take on social media? So like, I know you have a YouTube channel. That's how when I was researching for the podcast, I looked up some of your content. What's your take on it? You mentioned it is a fard kifaya just now.
Yeah. So I've been on social media for a while,
right?
But I've never really taken on into it wholeheartedly,
right?
But when you get to my age, I know I'm not that old. You become a little bit what's the word? You become a little bit more forceful. You realize that you don't have to look over your shoulder as much. Now you have to get rid of the little scaffolding that holds you together. You want to kind of become your own person, grow your own wings. And I spoke to some of my teachers, and I was like, look, there's a lot of nonsense out there. There's lots of good content out there, and we should offer people a platform.
Right.
And some of my own students who'd study with me or friends that I knew were telling me, you should start exposing people to your learning, to your ideas, because my whole philosophy is about synthesizing. Or tahqiq, which is that we engage in scholarship. So I'm not really myself into like pop Islam, right? The sort of Islam where it's about shouting and screaming. There's definitely space for that. People like that. You can go for that. But mine is the diet of reflective Islam based on tradition, but also engaging with modernity or post-modernity, if we like, and also giving young Muslims who are intelligent, who are thinking, who are asking questions, guidance and instruction in a ordered manner, to give them metaphysics, to give them a worldview that can help them. So that was the idea behind the social media platforming. I mean, I have a YouTube channel which is growing, and I have some students who sort of help me with putting a camera out and getting the lighting done and getting the videos out. So we're growing it organically.
Right.
And it's a different crowd to the Muslim community when it comes to what I would say the mosque public.
Yeah.
They have different needs. Social media has its own needs as well. And there's an adab that's different to the mosque as well. So I think it's an important space for people like me to be in, not as a competitor, but as a complementary way of approaching our faith.
Well, it's like you mentioned adab. It's almost like people think of social media as like lack of adab. That's what happens on social media. Whether it's because you have you're basically on YouTube, right? And then there's other avenues that that people engage on: Instagram, Twitter, and a lot of times people have challenges. I think the challenge we have on social media is, as someone who's been in this space and podcasting for almost like 7 years now, the adab card is something that you're always working on it, because it's you like, we all know what it means to be a prophetic individual, or what we aspire to be as far as being prophetic. But then the nature of social media, we will get sucked into things that cause us to like completely forget about that. How would you help people navigate that? That's a challenge I think a lot of us on social media have.
Tamam.
Like we will have, like, I mean, a very common example. Sometimes we use intentions. Like somebody will, I'll give you an example of how this stuff happens, right? So let's say a couple weeks ago, there's this there's this photo going around of Mike Tyson, or who's Muslim, as we all know, at some event for like a fundraiser for, I think, the IDF, right? The Israeli Defense Force. And there's people already shouting like, "What's he doing there?" They want to cancel him. And then Mike puts out a statement on Instagram saying that, like, "Hey, I actually didn't know, what this was. They just invited me to his dinner, and et cetera, et cetera." And some people, and I was having this dialogue back and forth with some people. Like, I'm like, listen, we know that Mike has been hit in the head a few times. Like, he's in boxing, right? It's quite, and it's fair. It's unfair for us to assume that he's going to be super well versed in geopolitics. A lot of the people who come to Islam from very, like Shaquille O'Neal's Muslim. You know Shaquille O'Neal? Yeah. The basketball player.
He came in a movie, right, as well.
Yeah, he's done movies and stuff.
Yeah,
but he does advertising for Papa John's Pizza.
Right.
It's like pepperoni pizza. It's called the shakaroni. It's like, that's pork.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's just like, there's this like sometimes people come to Islam and they just don't know anything, or they heard about Islam. The theology resonates with them. They get plugged in. But sometimes then what happens is that people see that and they want to take it and put it on social media, and then later we're like, "Oh, sorry, and then Mike Tyson puts out a statement, and then some people are like, "Oh, sorry, we should have like thought better of it." But you already put it out there, right? As an example, there's all kinds of examples. You have a clip of somebody saying something that you don't hear the full context, and then it gets parroted on Twitter, and people make judgments about it, etc. I think that's a huge trap that we all fall into. How was you knowing that there are problematic statements made by people, right? And then we live in a time, especially now with the situation in Gaza, very like emotions are high.
Yeah,
people are ready to fall flat to handle. To me, as someone who is like has a cursory understanding of like tasawwuf, that doesn't seem like the right approach. That we just like react in that way that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's many ways of approaching this, but it's very simple. I joined social media reluctantly. What I mean by that is, I remember a friend of mine, Mohsin Sagir, shouting his name out. He lives in Medina now. He came to my house and he set up my YouTube channel in 2019.
Okay.
2019. And he bought me a little Rode mic. I didn't even know Rode mic was a thing, right? And he said, "This is how you start." But the YouTube channel only took off less than 8 months ago.
Okay.
It's 2023 now. So before that, I wasn't really on social media as much. In fact, I only graduated from madrasa in 2006. So I graduated in 2006 when the internet was just coming out. It's only in the last 6 to 8 months that I've become a little bit more active, carefully active on social media. And that's because I've been spending a lot of time reflecting, reading, building up my spiritual resources, my intellectual resources. Of course, we're all on a journey. And then when I go on social media, I'm always careful about, I have certain adab, certain ways of being on social media. And the thing with social media, as you know, is it's social. And so when you talk about sociality, naturally there are metaphysical or spiritual diseases that will manifest. So our ulama have talked about them. Riya, showing off, hubbul jah, love of people. These things, these diseases are allowed to manifest in these spaces. That doesn't mean you don't engage in them. It means that you're prepared to engage in them, knowing that these things can happen. Right. And usually the lowest common denominator comes from social media. A lot of these people would never get a space in a mosque as an imam or a public speaker. But we are. We are on social media, but I'm also respected, alhamdulillah, in my community too. So what we need to do, people like us, like yourselves, is we need to become the model. Because people don't learn through rules, they learn through modeling. The Quran could have just been revealed to us, downloaded into the world, and that's it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, or sent down, or embodied a prophet who showed us how to live these things. So in the same way, we need to model how to behave on social media. And going back to your specific example of Mike Tyson, I'm somewhat aware of it. When I first saw that, my instinctive gut reaction was exactly what you said. There's been a misunderstanding. Why did I come to that conclusion? Why did I not go, let me go on my social media channel and let me just do a half an hour video on doing takfir on him? Or like, let me just tweet it because I can get so many followers. Why was my gut reaction, natural reaction, that this might be not true, or there's a strong likelihood that he might have been duped into this? Because we understand human nature from studying and from our teachers, that people sometimes can find themselves in positions that they're not simply aware of, or images are very much so. Images, pictures. I look at images in the same way I look at hadith.
Okay.
Let me explain that for you. So, a hadith, a single text on any narration. For those who don't know, a hadith is like for our understanding, a hadith is a statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he says something, or he's seen to have done something, or he's stayed quiet or something. Now that's a snapshot of the Prophet's life. You would be foolish to create an entire worldview based on one hadith. What do? You take every hadith. We're not talking about criticizing whether it's sahih or da'if. You take all of them, because the other is that Muslims are honest. So you take all of them, and what you do is you put all the images together and you try and make sense of that. This image says this image says something different. That might have been early on in his life. That might have been later on in his life. The person who gave us this image, the Sahabi who narrates it, he acts differently to what's in the image. Can you see? So in the same way that when we see images, tasawwur, we should think like this, with the same level of criticality, that it might not be exactly what it is. So what you look at Mike Tyson's entire life, and you position that one image into his entire life. He's a Muslim. There are images of him praying. I've seen images of him praying. And like you said, he's a boxer. He might not be practicing. He lives in America, which is different. So all of these complexities are already working in your mind in the background. And you're like, all you need to do is, if you really care, reach out to him or speak to someone that knows him and just clarify the matter. فَتَبَيَّنُوا, as Allah says in the Quran. So the adab is doing that, and having that critical faculty to know that actually it might not be. But we live in an age where even when people know that, they will still share it, because they know that it gets them loads of views, because we love controversy, we love chaos, and Muslims get really sucked into it. And the algorithms feast on that as well. And so that's a challenge. The other thing is that having said all of that, the adab is also that if you really know that he's doing something wrong, the adab is also then to correct him. So I'm not promoting the idea of we should always stay silent, this whole adab card thing. The adab is also, because adab means وَضْعُ شَيْءٍ فِي مَحَلِّهِ, to put everything in its proper place. So if someone does something and it shouldn't be done, it should be done in a different way, then it's a duty of those who know to correct them in the right manner as well. So that needs to happen. But social media is a space usually for the worst elements of society to manifest themselves, generally speaking. And because it's a world where everybody's competing, sometimes the standard for morality, honesty, integrity is dropped. You see even respectable news organizations in a rush to get news out, or the first one to get some news out, they don't check things properly. We've seen it with the Gaza war, things that have then been debunked. But the danger with that is that it's already escaped, it's already reached the community before people know what was the reality. So damage is already done. And that reminds me of the story of Aisha radiallahu ta'ala when she was accused. Right? The accusation was very harmful. Right? The weight of the accusation. This is why in our tradition we have to be a little bit more critical in how we accept these things.
So one of the things I really wanted to pick your brain about was, I had a chance to watch one of your videos. You talked about like the kind of the self disciplines that we need to exude, hard work, consistency, patience, having a routine, and specifically about having a routine, right? And you did when you did your HIFs, it was part of the island program, or did you before it? So, at what age? Roughly how old were you at that time?
So I did it. I started first when I was 10.
Yep.
And then I came back to it again when I was about 13, 14.
Okay. The challenge I think we have, a lot of us, I speak for myself. We grew up in the education system where a routine is built for you. You go to high school, start from grade in America, K through 12, right? I don't know, you guys have like A level, B level, or O, was it O or A, or in England? But then you go to what you call college or university. When you first go to college or university, you're 17, 18 years old. Now, all of a sudden, you actually have a lot of free time because it's not in high school. Like let's say in high school, our day starts at like 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and you have classes back to back with a break for lunch, and you finish at 3 p.m. Right? And you're there. In college, all of a sudden, now you can pick your classes. You might not have a class till noon, and then you have another class at 7 p.m. And then you have all this open time. Right. I remember when I was in my senior year of high school, I was 16, 17 years old. There was a guy that came, he spoke to the whole high school. He talked about, he was part of a program called Making College Count. And he basically said that the way you have to treat your schoolwork in college like a full-time job, like a 9 to 5. So you have to do, so don't, just because you don't have class till noon doesn't mean you wake up at 11:30. Right? Or again, go at noon. You fill the time to do reading, everything like that, right? Easier said than done. I didn't implement it. Most people don't, right? I think it's because we have a challenge with making our own routines. We're able to manage things when it's dictated to us. I think maybe because our school system does it, right? You're talking now about you worked in corporate America or corporate England, tax attorney, tax consultant, and now you're doing a lot of reading. It seems like you're a lot of what you're working on is like more. You have to set your own schedule. What has been the pitfalls as you've seen for people because I think I struggle. The hardest part I think for me is like building a routine. Like at work, I know I have to be there at 9 o'clock, and I'm working till 6, and I'm able to get a lot done in my work day. But then, if I had open time, like we have a 4-day holiday here, right? I had this podcast that I'm doing. There's more I can do for this podcast, right? But it's really challenging because no one is there's no one breathing down my neck to make this podcast. You get what I'm saying? I have no boss. It's just something that's self-sufficient. There's no one I'm waiting on. We'll record this. I'll probably release it in a couple weeks. You know what I mean? Sometimes the guests will ping me and say, hey, where's my episode? Because they took the time for it, right? But in general, there isn't that. And most people, we always have these interests that we have outside of our 9 to 5 or our school or whatever, whether it's studying Islam, martial arts, going to the gym, etc. How does one, what's been your experience as far as building routines that work when there necessarily isn't someone that's going to be like breathing down your neck to give you that sense of urgency?
Good question. So just to give you one experience.
Yeah.
When we were in madrasa, it was highly routinized. You have to be there 8 o'clock till 12 o'clock. So that teaches you the idea of being there on time. That's tartib, if you like, organization.
By the way, I'm going to eat a banana real quick.
Yeah, you go for it.
Because all of a sudden I just felt really hungry.
You can have whatever you want. There's chewing gum there. There's an iPhone if you want to eat that too.
The banana will hit the spot.
Yeah, I don't know how edifying it will be. When I went to university, I had the same experience. All of a sudden I had more free time, and in madrasa it's very structured. So I had to adapt to a world where it was more about self-learning. In a madrasa, it's given to you.
Right.
In a university, you have to fish for it.
Also in madrasa, they probably have removed all the distractions too, right?
Yeah, this was an age where internet was just emerging. I can't think of how students. I can't imagine how students survive today.
Were you in it was like a boarding school, like a Darul Uloom?
Yes,
So you
boarding,
lived
but I
there.
wasn't living there.
You weren't living
I
there.
wasn't living there, but I would go there 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm there till 8 o'clock in the evening.
Okay.
But the internet was just emerging. Mobile phones hadn't quite reached our hands. And so I actually see it as a blessing, especially with what I see today.
Right.
So I had the blessing of not worrying about, what someone said on Twitter or what's the latest, bit of news that's irrelevant bit of news that seems to be very important. So at university, the mobile phones just had come out, but the more to the point was I did realize I had more time. So I had like Wednesdays free. On Friday, I would have 1 hour lecture or 2 hour lecture, completely odd to what I was used to at the madrasa. And that made me realize how easy university actually really is compared to a madrasa system. So I found university relatively easy because I come from a system that was quite intense to a system that was less intense but more about writing. The only challenge I had was being able to write because I hadn't learned those skills.
Okay.
That was my real challenge. What I would say to people is two things. You need something that drives you, something that motivates you. If I stop you on the street and I say to you, what are the 3 things that motivate you? You should be able to give me the answer straight away. If you can't, you don't have a driving force behind you. What drives you? What makes you wake up in the morning? What keeps your mind buzzing at night, even when your body's lying on the bed? You have to have something that drives you, motivates you beyond the mundane, i.e. beyond just putting food on the table, beyond just beating your partner so you can earn more salary and get that job. Beyond all of that, what drives you? What's your ultimate purpose? It's not enough to say, because Muslims will say, Sheikh, I want to get to Jannah. What does that mean? We all want to get to Jannah. What does it mean in concrete terms for you to get to Jannah? What are you doing in concrete terms? Can you lay the path for me? Can you show me the directions that you're taking for you, that works for you, with all your kids and family and everything else that works for you to get to Jannah? Can you show me that? Otherwise, you're in that ocean being driven by the wind and the movement of whatever the tides are going. So I think when you have that path, it keeps you rooted, it keeps you anchored, and it allows you to stay focused. And then you work backwards. All right, so for example, I want to get a first class degree, because if I get a first class degree, I'll get a good job. If I get a good job, I have nice living standards. If I have nice living standards, I can focus on teaching. I don't have to worry about money all the time. I can have a good wife, good lifestyle, good car, everything else. Nothing wrong with it, right? It absolutely makes sense. Therefore, right now, my priority is getting a first class degree. Therefore, my priority is that when I have time, I'm doing as much as possible to make sure that I reach that target. So it has to be concrete steps which are clearly identifiable, with built-in flexibility, of course, right? Things can go awry, things can go wrong, but you need to have that. And then you make your day fixed. So you have a general fixed routine that I will wake up at 5 o'clock. From 5 till 11, I'm going to be on my computer, not on WhatsApp, but typing, reading or writing. Then I'm going to spend some time with my kids. I'm going to go to the gym. You have a routine 5 days of the week. Sunday, Saturday, you might want to socialize. You might want to go out with your friends. That's all important as well, right? So you also understand huququl ibad, like your wife has rights, your children have rights. So you need to have tartib, but you also need to communicate that to other people.
Yeah.
So people know, for example, that if you ring me after 10 p.m., I'm not going to answer my phone.
Okay.
Right? Or 9:30 p.m. My phone just goes on to silent. I might check it, but I don't feel any compulsion to respond to you, because that's my time when I'm reading quietly. Oh, that's my time when I'm catching up with my wife and my kids, right? And then I tell people. But it's also learning the art of saying no as well, because sometimes people make a lot of demands upon you. I get a lot of people inviting me to things, write this for me, present this for me, and you have to be very selective. Otherwise, you will just be consumed by people. So you have to be very strategic in what you engage with. But people should know. So my wife knows what my routine is. I know what her routine is. She knows what really makes me upset, and I know what makes her upset. So people know, for example, that I don't like people wasting my time. It's well known.
Okay.
So don't come to see me just to waste my time. Like, see me for maqsad, for a purpose. I'm not getting any younger. I need to achieve things. My wife knows I hate traffic jams. It's one thing that I hate. In America, I know you have this problem, but
in Blackburn, do you guys have traffic?
I live in an area where we don't have traffic.
Okay.
But if I get stuck in traffic, it's like it's the worst thing you could do to me. It's like you're punishing me. It's like you're taking my nails out. And it's torture. I'm using an example because of what that guy said in America. When he said it to the Arab brothers. I don't want to mention his name. Okay. The one who works for the State Department. He talked about Okay. Anyway, you won't know about it. You're a Sharif person, mashallah. So having a tartib,
right,
but communicating that to people as well, so they know who you are. They know what winds you up. They know like what things you don't like.
Yeah,
that's a form of adab, and letting people know. So being aware, and this is just pure Islamic virtue. So I think that's how I try to manage things. I have times when I'm focused. I have times when my phone. The phone's the biggest distraction.
Yeah.
So I have times when my phone is not with me. I don't have to follow every WhatsApp group and every chat that goes on. If it's relevant, it's relevant. But people, what you do is you create a world where the world conforms to you. What happens to us is that we let the world dictate our lives. But you have to carve a world where people know that Haroon will only respond if I text him privately, if I do this for him, if I do that, if I communicate it to him in a certain way.
Yeah.
So you create the world for you.
Right. Well, I want to go back to this idea of purpose, right? Because I think that's really critical. When you were in undergrad, after doing madrasa and you went to the university, what was your purpose at that time?
First class degree, clearly.
For
economics. I wanted to make sure that I was top of my class.
Okay.
And I worked for it. I relaxed. I played football.
Okay.
I went out and did things, but ultimately in the back of my mind, nothing was going to compromise my attempt to get a first class.
First class means top of the class?
Top of the class.
Not just graduating.
Not just graduating.
Okay.
The reason was simple. I was from an underprivileged class. I knew that. So if I'm going to go to an employer with a pass, that's not going to make my profile sit on top of the pile. I wanted to make sure I was on top of the pile.
Right.
But it was a personal sense of self-fulfillment, because until then I hadn't really achieved much in my life that I felt I was happy with. In my first year, I was shocked to get a first class. I in some of my exams I got really high marks, and I can remember getting those marks and I didn't believe it, and it imbued me with confidence. But why was it until the age of 21, 23 that I got to that stage? Why can't it come earlier? This is a larger critique of our society, of the Muslim community, that in certain places we don't celebrate success. We look down upon success. We frown upon those who want to be successful, when we should be encouraging it, endorsing it, supporting it. And I know there's a broader class issue here.
Right.
So when I got my first class in the first year overall, it gave me a strong sense of belief. And I was like, oh, I can do this. And, I would spend an extra hour in the library. I would have times during the day when I was at university where I would just sit in the library. And what's the funny thing? In the madrasa tradition, we read books entirely.
Yeah.
Right? So in economics or in our modules, the lecturer would usually tell you, read this book, this chapter.
Okay.
But because I was daft, or I was trained in a madrasa tradition, that would never gratify me. So I would read the entire book. So you say read the chapter on development theory, for example. I would read the entire book.
But you talk about, like, in madrasa you learn about speed reading.
Speed reading, yes.
So you're able to probably read faster and
retain. And when it came to exams, I mean, my friends know this. They'll be watching this. My university mates who all work in corporate fields now, mashallah, they would all come to me for the exam papers. What I would do is, I shouldn't boast, but this will be a tip for people, inshallah.
Right, sure.
So I would print out every single exam paper under the sun in that university, in that module, and I would sit and answer all of those questions. Okay. I would practice every paper and I would create model answers.
Okay, so like breaking this down, right? So how would you incorporate that like in a week? So you have, or how would you organize your schedule then? With like, so what were you? Okay, so I'll tell you how you're outlining a very ideal way of how we approach. Obviously, and you seem like you got the marks or the grades to like that reflected it, right? I was thinking this morning about like when I was studying college, like especially like my first transition from high school to college, and it was a struggle for me because often it would be like you know what you have to do, but then you're walking on campus, you see a friend, it's like, hey, what's going on? Oh, let's go get some coffee.
Yeah, yes.
You know,
It
and they get
happens,
distracted. And the next thing you know, it's like 2 hours gone.
It happens.
Or oh, you know what? I don't have class finishes at 2. I'm gonna go take a nap for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Like there's this meme. Have you seen this meme where it's called nap roulette? I'm gonna go take a nap, and I'm not gonna set an alarm, and it could be half an hour or it could be 4 hours.
Yeah.
And you don't. And if it's 4 hours, guess what? 4 hours are gone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'd like to understand like how you actually like how you did all the okay, granted you took these exams, practice exams, but how would you structure the day to accomplish that?
Yeah. So I have a routine where I wake up at a certain time. It doesn't deviate much.
Okay.
Yes, the deviation happens in my free time on the weekends.
Right.
So for example, if people want to meet me now, when I'm back in the UK, they will tell you that you meet me on the weekend, not during the weekday. Unless you're coming from America, Chicago, and you're really important like you, then we make exceptions.
Right.
But generally speaking, if you want to meet me Saturday evening, come to my house, we'll have coffee, we'll relax. So you build in time for all.
So Saturday evening is your time block. People know this.
Yeah, and Sundays with my family.
It's like office hours.
Yeah, and Sunday I have imamat, so I have to lead the prayers.
Right.
I voluntarily lead the prayers.
Okay.
That's my time to connect with the community. So I'll have a majlis. We'll do durus from the Ihya Ulumuddin or some book. That's my time to connect with the community. But during the week, I'm busy. I have commitments. I have to honor my academic duties, my duties as a father, my duties as a husband. And even my mom and dad know that. My mom and dad, mashallah, Allah bless them and preserve them. They know that I work in a certain way. And they know that I get frustrated if it doesn't work according to the way I want it to do. So going back to your question, yes, at university this used to happen. I used to meet friends.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't refuse to meet them. I would entertain them. But as soon as I'd make up for that time. So if I had 2 hours where I could have done some reading, on a Saturday, I'd go back and catch up a little bit on reading. But when it came to exam time, when it came to essays, I was very strict.
So you wouldn't get you wouldn't like, because I think the university students, right, listening to this, the factor is you get distracted, right? Your day. It happens to me today. I'll be honest. Like, so a couple of weeks ago, Sheikh Amin, you're visiting Darul Qasim, right? Sheikh Amin has Tafsir Sunday, right? It's at 11 o'clock. Now, I know usually if I go for Tafsir, some of the brothers, we're going to get together, we're going to have lunch after, right? But then Tafsir goes from 11 to 11:45, we pray Dhuhr, right? And then it's like 45 minutes debating where you're going to go eat.
Yeah.
Then it's like 1 hour gone, pretty much. Yeah. And then you go eat. And they're like, okay, I got to do groceries. And then some of the guys are like, hey, you want to get some coffee too? Next thing you know, it's like 5 p.m., 6 p.m.
Yeah.
Right?
It happens.
But that's like, it happens to me as a adult in my early 40s, right? College kids, even less, like, going on, I think that's the thing. So you're saying you would have situations where you're on campus, you see a friend, and you start chatting, and the next thing you know, an hour's gone.
Yeah.
But you just recognize that and then allocated for that time to be made up elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not at university now, so I have more of a professional life.
Right.
But there are times when things do shift. Like, for example, I'm away from my desk at the moment for a week or two.
Right.
Because I'm in the US, but I've still made my desk here.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever's left of it.
Right.
So I still my life still continues wherever I am. But I'll pick up when I get back. So it's all about being organized, not just in your daily routine, but also thinking ahead.
Yeah.
So like, for example, in the next year, 2024, when I'm sitting here again, maybe inshallah with you.
Yeah.
Where do I want to be? When in 2 years' time, where do I want to be? When I'm on my deathbed, and my daughters are standing next to me on my deathbed, picture it. What would you want to leave behind? And work towards that. Yes, having friends is important, but also with friends, you have to be strategic.
Right.
Right. What are the sort of people you want to hang around with? Who are the sort of people that you should be hanging around with? This is really basic, but it's important. Friendship is very important. Having the right type of people is very, very important. Networking is part of our tradition. I mean, ulama networked all the time. We have books that talk about where they travel, but it was always strategic friendship.
Yeah.
Right? It was friendship for the greater good, not friendship for the sake of having coffee for 4 hours and not achieving any end of it. When I want to sit down with coffee with you, I want to know that something at the end of it might come out of it. There's something good. وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. Assist one another in piety and righteousness. So even in our meetings, there should be an ethical, moral dimension to it.
Right.
And we should not just be meeting just for the sake of it.
Yeah, I got you. So like when you reached out to me, right? What was the process in your head? Because it's not like it's different. It was like I got a message from you.
Mm-hmm.
When you reached out to me, we have, like I said, we have a mutual friend. What's the thought process for you to like, I'm gonna reach out to this guy who we have a mutual friend. I don't know him, but understanding that there may be some time I have to spend with him if I'm reaching out, of course, right?
Yeah,
so
of course.
Walk me through that.
So maqsad.
Yeah.
Why am I texting Fulan bin Fulan?
Yeah.
Because he has potentially something to gain from me. I have something to gain from him. That's what friendship is.
Sure.
Friendship is meaningful when you gain something. I don't mean in a capital corporate sense.
Sure.
I mean just in a moral sense, in an ethical sense. And so I knew that you were doing some podcast. Maybe I'll do a podcast with you. Maybe I'll get to see Chicago more.
Right.
Because I'm interested in experiences. I'm interested in maybe I'll meet a scholar.
Yeah.
That is an expert in a certain field that I'm completely deficient in, and I through you I get his WhatsApp number. So whenever I need to study something or answer something, I can just pick up the phone, talk to him for 10 minutes, and get 10 years or 15 years of knowledge,
right,
just given to me in a few drops that I can now implement strategically, and that's beneficial for him. That's beneficial for me.
Right.
So I think about it in these terms. Now you can call that, a form of appropriation, or you can look at it in negative terms. But I look at it in a positive term because in our tradition, in Islam, it's all about benefiting one another. Khairun nas may yanfa'un nas.
Right.
Right. The best of people is the one who benefits one another.
Yeah, I think it's a very organized approach. I mean, there's no, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And I think, to me, even if I was visiting, I think the added value, the way your approach was, is that let's say I was visiting. Now I have a podcast, right? Let's say I'm visiting England. If I didn't have a podcast, but if I was just like going to a random city where there would be no podcast guests, I would still probably be open to meeting people, depending on what else I'm going. Because otherwise you're just by yourself, right? You know what I'm saying? Because you'll see on Facebook, you have Facebook friends. I don't know if you're on Facebook, but people say I'm gonna be in Washington D.C. for 4 days. Who's here?
Yeah, I tweet about it.
And then people will just will come in, meet you.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you are at the same time, you may get, but you also understand you may get nothing. You may not click with the person at all either.
Yeah.
But it's fine.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? You're not marrying them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But you also become the synaptic node.
Right.
So I might meet you.
Yep.
And nothing might really come out of it.
Right.
But by me meeting you, I can connect you with somebody else. That would lead to something else.
Yeah.
But the node is our connection. And so we're all in this endeavor to help one another. And a greater global narrative in all this, Islamically speaking, is that we are an ummah.
Right. And
there are people that should know people.
Yeah.
There are people of common interest that should come closer together.
Right.
Because in a metaphysical sense, the Prophet ﷺ said the ruh are like armies and similar compositions come close to one another.
Yeah.
So there are people who will naturally attract towards one another, and the strength in numbers.
Yeah.
Especially in our age where we are becoming a global ummah or glocal ummah, and there are many of us who share similar ideas.
We say global?
Global and local.
Okay, gotcha.
So I'm combining two words together.
Okay.
Yeah? Sorry, synthesizing. You've got to get used to my synthesis.
Sure, okay.
So this idea of there's global networks, but there's also local networks. And so what I'm trying to say here is we're talking about network theory now.
Right.
We're theorizing networking, but in an Islamic sense.
Yeah.
Which has virtue in it.
So, yeah, because you know what? I was my co-host from the Mad Mamluks, Sheikh Amr Saeed. I was hoping maybe you could meet him before you go to Chicago. I'll have to give him a call, see how he's not sick,
Okay.
but he also doesn't produce podcasts. He just shows up and talks.
Yeah.
So he could help you there. But he one thing he always tells me is like, Maheen, you really like connecting. I'm like, well, like me personally, I have inherent like pleasure in seeing like-minded individuals connect, even if I get nothing out of it, right? So you're saying that there's actually and I always thought, oh, this is something that just like is like my own weird quirk.
No,
but you're saying there's actually a thing.
Of course.
Okay.
Think about how human beings are inherently social animals.
Right.
Look in the West, the fact that we see the fragmentation of families and communities.
Mm-hmm.
When I say the West, at least in Britain.
Yeah.
Okay. And what that is leading to. But look at Islam. Islam is a civilizational value.
Right.
And it's all about sociability. In fact, you could take it right to the core. Think about the 5 pillars of Islam. Let's leave the interesting one till the end. Salah. Salah is what? Huququllah.
Sure.
It's a relationship between. It's a vertical relationship.
Yeah.
It's also a horizontal relationship. It's also a relationship between you and fellow human beings. Think about a jama'ah. Why do you have to pray in jama'ah? There's a social dimension to it. The fuqaha knew this. So when they talk about salah wal jama'ah and the conditions, it's a form of social ordering, right? If you look in the books of fiqh, despite the mazahib saying women should pray at home, they still entertain the possibility of women praying in the masjid. And they give them a space in the masjid. But they're not the only ones who are included. The children are included. The hermaphrodites are included. Sahih?
Right.
So the prayer, although it's a huququl ibad, it's interwoven into the fabric of society. It's a form of social inclusion. In our deen, through the prayer, we're learning about social inclusion. Can you see? The Jews go into great minutiae. They say after Dhuhr prayer, if you're praying 2 rak'at sunnah, and you know that it's work time, and you know that there's someone waiting for you outside the masjid, keep it short.
Yeah.
Don't be overzealous.
Right.
Because why? It's huququl ibad. The Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he found out that some of the companions were leading long prayers, what did he say? فَمَا بَالُ الْقَوْمِ What's wrong with the people? There's old people, there's the people who need to go to work.
Yeah.
Yani keep it short. So what you're saying in prayer. What's the other one? Zakah. Zakah is the obvious one, right?
Sure.
It's a spiritual purification, but it has a societal benefit. That's the easy one. Fasting. You're gonna say to me, Sheikh, what about fasting? No, fasting is also societal. Think about it. It's one of the most manifestly hidden forms of ibadah because nobody can tell you're fasting, but you do it together.
Yeah.
You do it at the same time throughout the planet. Right? You break the fast together. You do Eid together. It's a social event, even though it's vertical. Which one's left now? Hajj. You do it together. It's a farz ayn. You have to do it. I can't do it for you.
Right.
But you do it with the entire ummah. You see the miracle of the ummah together. Right? The final one is a shahada. Somebody will say, Sheikh, shahada is not, that's between me and God. No, the moment you enter the fold of Islam, you have rights as a Muslim.
Yeah.
Societal. So it's our fragmented understanding. But in Islam, there is no excessive individualism, as Charles Taylor would think about it in his work. For us, we're fundamentally part of society. We have rights, even in our duty towards God, towards other people. The inseparable, the vertical and the horizontal are working at the same time. And just to stretch it a little bit further, this is like in every form of society. Historically speaking, Bimaristan, now you have private hospitals. Muslims saw it as a form of social virtue to just fund hospitals, to help people, education institutions. So what I'm saying here is that this is really important to bear in mind in our thinking through fiqh, through theology, through society, through tasawwuf, and these ideas.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, that's good to hear. You talked earlier about this goal. So, it's funny because when you mentioned this whole idea that we have this goal about saying Jannah, right? Yeah. That's our purpose. And then it makes it super generic. Yeah. It's like I've been married now 14 years and change, right?
You've been married for 14 years.
Yeah.
Well done, Mubarak.
Mashallah. Sometimes I wonder how.
Well done, you've done well.
You know.
Yeah.
So when
You're
my
already
wife,
in Jannah then.
sorry,
You kind of already entered in Jannah.
you know,
You've done this long.
when we were talking, my wife and I, we were like talking. When you're talking to your spouse before you're married, and it's very like you're on your P's and Q's and very idealistic. You're saying like,
Yeah.
I'm looking for a spouse that we will prepare ourselves for Jannah.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it's like super generic. And then you're like looking back, like, man, like, what are we?
Yeah.
Like I feel like we've lost it. But I think part of it, the question I have for you is that sometimes we also struggle with like, we feel like that we're just entitled to Jannah by our Shahada.
We are entitled to Jannah.
Yes.
By virtue of our Shahada.
Correct.
Okay.
And because there's so much emphasis, I don't know how it's in the UK, but in America, there, there's all these pejoratives that like, we'll meet people where they're at, we'll be compassionate. And we were talking earlier, we're giving examples of people who convert to Islam, but they're not really practicing, but like, let's take it easy because, it's the world we live in, etc. And so I feel like we sometimes, there's like, it's a struggle, right? It's the challenge of, the fear of the fire, but then we're like, well, you hear all the stuff about Allah's mercy, and then you feel like, oh, well, I'm good, and therefore, this purpose of having Jannah, of pursuing Jannah, and having this like super, this like step by step process to get there, feels like, well, no, I'm good. It's not that big of a deal. I'm good. You know what I mean? I think that's the trip up that we have with having that kind of goal as a purpose. Like how would you like?
So it's very generic.
It makes it generic, and I feel like we I think as a community we feel like we have it for I think in our language, like for example, you go to a janazah, it could be anybody, right? And you're always asking that person in the dua, in the janazah, Allah give them Jannah without hisab, right? And we know that's not the majority of the ummah going without hisab, right? But then at the same time, we also understand that like, oh, we're all going to get in. And so therefore we take it for granted. And therefore, because it's taken for granted, it's not enough to drive us to do any action as far as any kind of purpose. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. So this is a toxic, not toxic, but a toxic mixing of a lack of seeking for the divine, combined with the comfortable nature of Westerners living here, and that's a dangerous mix. Although it seems very safe, it's actually quite dangerous, because a true lover of God or anything, like you play basketball or what's the sport here?
American football.
Right. So if you really love it, what do? You watch it. You go
get the jersey. You go to the games.
You spend money. Why? Why do you invest in it? Because the heart has found something in it.
Yeah.
So actually, we need to ask ourselves a deep question: if we claim to love God, then why aren't we showing at least the same level of zeal for Him? And this is because this is a form of secularism where God is like this distant thing for us, whereas God should be ever present for us. He should be illuminating our virtual existence, literally our existence.
Sure.
So that's the danger when you live the mundane life. And so what you need to do is inculcate in people Allah. God needs to be discussed. Allah needs to be discussed in every moment of our life. The divine breath. Think about a divine breath. وَنُفِخَ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِهِ. Right? Allah talks about what? This enunciation of creation. Ibn Arabi has some fascinating insights into it. We won't go into it for now. But there's this enunciation of the cosmos in a divine breath. We don't know what it is like, right? They talk about ayan thabita and all of these philosophical terms. But that's also reminding us that God should be in our breath, in every breath that we take, in every heartbeat that we take. Because in qalaba, right? Allah, the hadith tells us what? Like our hearts are between usba', like the two fingers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever that means, the idea is that our heart should always be in some way connected to God. The way you do that, though, is through habitus. Right, not the Bourdieusian, Pierre Bourdieu's idea of the habitus. What I mean here is malaka. This idea that you train yourself And even when you're doing accounts or you're teaching, God is still beating in your heart. Allah is still beating. And that's a form of training that needs to take place in the person. And then you have this shawk, this hope for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want to please Him in every way possible, even in the most mundane activities.
Yeah.
Right? And if that doesn't happen, then shaitan will have an opportunity and he will drag you away. So having these ideas is fine, but I think the love of Allah sometimes is not the way it should be. That said, there's also a second thing, which is, a plane has two wings, not one wing.
Yep.
Right? So our ulama talk about raja and khawf. These are the two wings. One is the pushing force, one is the pulling force. Right? The raja, what we call the hope, is what pulls you towards Allah. That Allah, hopefully, inshallah, I'll get it. That's the element that people are comfortable with. Like, I'll get
open fear.
Open fear.
Yeah.
And then you have khawf, which is this idea that, I don't want to fall short, right? I don't want to disappoint my Allah.
Yeah.
And so that's the pushing force. That's the thrust, if you like, to stay with the plane analogy.
Right.
And so what we need is raja and khawf. We need to have hope in Allah, one wing, and khawf in Allah, which is the other thing.
There's this, you mentioned you've interacted with people of other faiths, like Christians and whatnot. Especially Christians, they often talk about this relationship. Have you heard this? They have this relationship with God.
Yeah, they talk about it, yes.
A lot. Like, I have this relationship with Jesus, and I don't think that Muslims, those of us who are tasawwuf inclined can relate, but I think a lot of us, the way we're raised in our like atmospheres, everything's like this. Well, you don't do this, you're gonna go to hell. This kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's a devoid of that relationship part is not there. We talk about so is tasawwuf like it's my perspective that as someone who's been through different iterations, I came through Salafiyah to my practice, and then I eventually moved into more the traditional. I feel like certain this is something that the science of tasawwuf is the key to that outlook. Without it, it's really not practical for people living especially in Western societies. Yeah. Like in the Muslim world, if you go to the Muslim world, the atmosphere of people can say what they want. We're not living under a caliphate, so what? In the sense of like, if you go to have you ever been to like Morocco, right?
Yes.
More like in Fez. In Fez, there's like this atmosphere that just like something. The air is different. Everybody there's a lived experience of Islam, right? In America, we don't have that, right? You're going to work. You're not dealing with people. People don't. You don't want to talk about God. People are like, it's funny because even if you mention somebody like, oh, did you go to church? Like, were you at church? And some people get offended. Like, why would you think I'd go to church? I'm a man of science. I don't go to church, right? I think because of the atmosphere we live in, I feel like that whatever tasawwuf, however you want to look at it, it has to be like part of it. Otherwise, you're gonna not. I just don't see how you can have that relationship with the love of Allah without that.
Yeah. So there's a number of things. Tasawwuf, however you want to define it, as ihsan or Sufism, we don't have time to go into maybe a separate podcast.
Right.
I can unpack for a lot of our Puritan friends. What tasawwuf actually is and how it's strongly rooted in our tradition in the Quran and the Sunnah.
Right.
That's a separate discussion. But it's definitely a very valid form which Sunni civilization has endorsed. Remember the three tripartite.
Sure.
Yeah. You have kalam or theology, you have fiqh, which is a mode of being, and then you have Sufism, which is beauty of your religion, aesthetic beauty, and so forth. So it's definitely a tried and tested approach based in the Quran and the Sunnah of giving meaning to your life. أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك, as the Prophet ﷺ said in the Hadith of Jibreel, that God is like there. He's present with you. In the Muslim countries, it's there. Right? In the non-Muslim countries, we need, as young Muslims, we need to create the spiritual Darul Islam. Right? This place where it's the abode of Islam, spiritually speaking, not legally speaking just yet. Maybe in the future, and it'll be Hanafi, inshaAllah ta'ala. But what I'm saying is we need to create the spiritual, metaphysical Darul Islam. How do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to tap into our civilizational ethos, the triad I've been talking about,
Right.
trying to bring that into our lives here in the West. Not because remember, we don't want the West to fail,
Yeah.
right? I know some people will say it's a burning house, and we're jumping into a burning house. We as Muslims want to make the world a better place. The Prophet ﷺ came into a society was completely fragmented, completely depraved culture. But what did he do? He set to work. He set to work, and he did the work, and he tried his best to make it at least a better place for the people. So we have that duty because we're here now in America or Britain, and this is our home.
Yeah.
So as Muslims, we need to fundamentally understand that. So as much as we are, we talk about West and we critique it, it's our society. These are our people.
Yeah.
And these are also part of the ummah. The only difference between me and you and them is that we've accepted, inshallah, the message. They haven't. But why can't they accept the message? Why can't Islam also reach them? You get into the kalam conversation of who's mukallaf, right? If Islam reaches them, then they also have an obligation. We have an obligation to teach them. So I think this is really important, first and foremost, to clarify that we are here and we are present. Yes, Islam is not in the air that we breathe, right? Then we need to exhale it. We need to breathe it out. We need to make this place not Islamic, but reminding people of God. And that takes a Herculean effort on our part, which is exactly what the prophets had to do as well. Like, did you think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ, like you're going to enter Jannah, وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ رُسُلٌ مِّن قَبْلِكُمْ, like you're not going to be tested, مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولَ الرَّسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. Like they're going to be tested, you're going to be cancelled, your name's going to be published on some website, which means you can't get a job. You're going to be tested. And these are like luxury tests compared to what people had to go before us. So we have to be prepared for that. But that also goes back to the fundamental question of strengthening our communities. We need to have a depth in our religion, because Allah says what in the Quran? وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِهِ. Those who are deeply learned in their faith, they say that they will believe. If you have deep understanding of Islam as a metaphysical, as a truth, as a worldview, then you will stay firm whatever happens. But if your understanding of religion is very superficial, right, the Akhi type Islam, or like the Sahih Hadith, and that's all you know, right, then that's problematic. You need to know the depth of your religion, therefore you become strong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, what dua do we ask for increase in? Ilm. وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. Allah, increase me in knowledge, because ilm is an attribute of God. And so the more you have that attribute in your own life, the closer you draw to God.
So I think that as I'm hearing you talk about this, we talk about baseline understanding, like, basic creed, basic fiqh, practice, etc. It seems to me, because of the environment we live in and the responsibility now, right, that we have to be conduits for guidance, not only for, first of all, ourselves, save yourselves first, right? But then you have to emanate that. I just don't see how people can be content with just a cursory understanding of Islam.
In the West?
In the West, yeah. I feel like it's impossible.
In the West, I've come to the conclusion as a Muslim living here that it's insufficient to leave madrasa at 60 and stop learning. Every Muslim should, by their own accord, and I'm saying this as with a sense of urgency, every Muslim has not to settle upon the farz ayn, but they need to learn more. They need to learn two things at the basic level. They need to understand some basic Western philosophy at a very basic level. That's the takhalli, because you cannot help someone until they realize they're sick. So a lot of our ideas, a lot of our questions come from the fact that we've been drinking, I heard someone say this in America, the Kool-Aid of modernity. Let me give you a simple example. I mentioned this in a masjid in San Antonio. Somebody came to me, I get this quite often, Maulana or Sheikh or Doctor, what's the answer to this question? And I say, well, because this is a particular type of question, there are this many opinions, you take which one works for you best. And he'll be a STEM PhD student, and he will say to me, but why can't you just give me one answer? And I'm like, this is modernity talking to me. The fact that you're asking me a question like that tells me that you've been drinking modernity, because pre-modern Muslims were comfortable. Ulama were comfortable with living with complexity, with living with ambiguity. They were fine with it because Allah knows the best, right? And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said that whoever does ijtihad, if they get the right answer, they get 2 rewards. If they get the wrong answer, they still get a reward. He's still not deprived. There's no deprivation in striving. So I would say, and I encourage Muslims watching this, that you must first do the takhalli, know what are the harms, not because you want to negate them because you can't, but you're aware of them. You're aware of what's poisonous, right? And then you then learn about your religion. So there's one thing, which is learning certain false premises, false ideas. So at least you're aware of them, right? And then you learn about your religion to a certain extent that you can fill that void with depth and clarity. And this, wallahi, this is the kalima. La ilaha, emptying. Illallah, filling. Can you see?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what will happen is if people are too much focused on modernity, post-modernity, positivism, scientificism, all these isms, their heart is filled with all of this, and then you pour the pure milk of Sharia into it, or Gnosticism, or Ma'rifah, or whatever you want to call it, fiqh, Aqidah, it's mixed up. Unless, mashallah, they're able to make sense of it. So you empty it. You know what the presuppositions are, and then you say, okay, this is our metaphysics. This is how fiqh works in my life. This is how Aqidah works. This is how theology works. This is how tasawwuf undergirds all of it. And pre-modern Muslims, you read any text of the Islamic intellectual tradition, they engage with all of this richness.
I gotcha. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of what I wanted to hear, because I think that I think as a community, people, especially as we get older, we are most of us are working. We're in our 30s, we're in our 40s, we're working, and there's not a lot of himma to learn anything. You're just content. Yeah. And therefore, and then I think you're the people aren't concerned about the guidance of human, and I think there's this approach. We have this faulty approach, especially those of us whether I don't know this much. So in America, it's my assessment of American Muslims. In America, the Muslims seem to be much more okay, we're just Americans, and we're Muslim, and it's almost like assimilating in a way, but assimilating without necessarily having any desire to spread Islam. Yeah. Right. Hey, this is good for me. It works for me. Yeah. You do what you want to do. I'm gonna make my money, etc. We have a perception in America that the people, because America, so it's probably funny because American Muslims think British Muslims are weird. I'm sure vice versa too, right? American Muslims have
the feeling is mutual, by the way.
Yeah, American Muslims feel when you hear British Muslims talk, it's almost like British Muslims hate Britain, and they're they almost want Britain to be destroyed.
Not me though.
But is that an accurate in America? We don't find you will be hard pressed to find an American Muslim that actually wants America to fail. Mm-hmm.
That's fine. I can agree with that.
You know what I'm saying?
I can agree with that.
But I feel that's. But then and it's very rare. The Sheikh Amins are of the world are very unique and are small frag. I think where it's we understand we need to be in America because we have an obligation to America because we live here. If we leave, we are foregoing a responsibility. Of course, right? Especially those of us who are those people who have learned, and we have to be conduits for guidance for the masses. Okay, right? But unfortunately, that's not spread. But we definitely do not have a sentiment where we wish the downfall of America. I don't think that's there. But I wonder if within the other Western countries, there's this semblance of just this approach, this mindset that this society must crumble for us to be successful.
Two things. Yeah. For me. Yeah. I would submit respectfully. Yeah. This is two major errors. Okay. Awalan, did the Prophet ﷺ, as our teleology, when he came to Mecca, Madinatul Munawwar, did he wish the destruction of those people? No. So where does this idea come from that we wish the destruction of society that we're in? How is it prophetic? Mm-hmm. What he had a problem was the ideas that were toxic.
Right.
So oppression, mistreatment of people. We should, as Brits, for example, talking as a Brit, we should identify with those who are least privileged in society.
Right.
We should be helping those people. We should be part of society. We should be trying to transform society to make it a better world. We should not be wishing this dislocation or destruction of any society. This is anti-prophetic.
Yep.
Which prophet would wish the destruction of his people, of his community? No. The Prophet ﷺ deeply loved Makkah. Even when they kicked him out, he loved Makkah. That was his place.
Right.
Right? Madinatul Munawwara. So Muslims, wherever they went, this is teleology. The second one is alongside that is history. Tell me a single country where Muslims went and they pillaged it like the colonizers do. Everywhere Muslims went, they became part of that society.
Yep.
So your own ajdad, your own great grandfathers, they went everywhere. Africa is North Africa, African countries, West Africa, it's Muslim. People recognize that as part of that country. Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia. Why? Because they understood the prophetic ethic. They understood that our civilization is one about building, right? So this idea of being anti-West, I don't recognize it. What we're anti is oppression, mistreatment, injustice. Yes, of course we could, and that means that opens up a space for you to work with other people. Right. You may not necessarily agree with everything that they stand for, but you can work and identify with people that are underprivileged or disenfranchised, and you can work with them as long as you set the parameters right, right? So we should never wish the destruction of a community. Alongside that, the third point is the Quran is clear. وَلَا تَزِرُ وَازِرَةٌ وِزْرَ أُخْرَى. No soul shall carry the burden of another soul. So they did stuff to our lands. Yeah. Historically speaking, it was oppressive. There was epistemological violence. There was physical violence. But it was a minority from that country. Most people in British society didn't even know what they were doing. So, I mean, that's besides the point. But are we holding a whole civilization guilty for what happened 2-3 generations ago? No, we're holding to account what the ideologies, the epistemologies that allow that oppression to take place. We challenge those false ideas. We challenge false ideas. That's the first thing that I want to say. The second thing, and I think as Brits and Americans and in the West, my appeal and my understanding is we have, alhamdulillah, it's a blessing from Allah, even as minorities, the potential to make huge impact, not only in the society that we live in, but also across the world. Because these societies, these countries wield a huge amount of influence globally, right? I mean, they don't even need to go to war. They just turn the tap off and these countries are crippled, right? And so in the long term, we should be thinking strategically 50 years from now, 100 years from now, what kind of involvement should we be having? And that means we need to be pragmatic. And that means that we will make mistakes along the way. But we should not, throw dirt on our own. They will make mistakes. We learn from our errors. We're living in huge numbers outside the abode of Islam, which many legal scholars or mutakallimin would say you shouldn't be living there. But we live in this world now. We live in nation states. So me, you, people like that, Allah has brought us here. And so our duty is like Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, which is that we try to transform the society that we live in. Or Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. He was in prison, unjustly, mistreated, abused. But when he came out, or when he was asked to interpret the deen, what did he say? He cleared his name and said, Ij'alni ala khaza'inil ard. Make me the finance director of a nation which is directly responsible in some ways for my oppression. Right. But he didn't take it out on them. He wanted to save that nation. Can you see? Yeah. Because vast majority of the people here, they don't really care about what's happening elsewhere. They just want to get food on the table. But they just want to make their ends meet. So we need to have that level of sophistication that we need to become fundamentally part of this society, using our numbers, use our intellect, and shift dialogues in certain ways that actually benefit not only the country here, but countries that these countries influence as well. Does that make sense? Yeah, absolutely. And that's a ni'mah if you can turn it that way. But if we carry on fighting and arguing, we're not going to get very far. Yes, criticality, discourses, these are all part of what we need to do.
Let me ask you, is it an accurate assessment? Because again, I've never been to England, right? Mm-hmm. The problem is like we only learn about our brethren in other parts of the world, sometimes via social media.
Yeah.
Is it accurate to say that there's a large segment of British Muslims, because British Muslims who think that way, or is that more of a minority?
No, I think Muslims are now. Muslims are now. There's a strong view amongst my community, or the people that I talk to, that this is our country.
Okay.
We need to move in a direction, and it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
Right. We need to move in a direction where we can draw upon our history, our tradition, the richness of it. I'm not talking about last 200 years.
Okay.
I'm talking about the 14 centuries.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Our cosmopolitanism, to use Western language.
Right.
Our openness, our confidence. We need to use all of that repertoire to become fundamentally part of that society. Not only to defend ourselves, because some people will say, well, we should become part of society. So something, like some people might think that, the next gas chambers they're going to have, we know who's going to be in there. It's not only about defending ourselves, but it's also about helping wider society. That's a prophetic trait. But going back to your particular question, there might be people who hold those views, and they're entitled to hold those views. I can't help them.
Yeah.
I can't. My job isn't to make people change their minds. I'll tell you what I think based on my learning, based on my reading of history, Quran, philosophy.
Yeah.
And I find it very alien.
Right.
If your grandfather from Bangladesh, and Bangladesh wasn't around not so long ago, right? If my grandfather, great-great-grandfather, was to be teleported or taken through time, and he saw us and the way we behave, would he recognize that as Islam? They would say this is a very narrow version of Islam that you guys are practicing. Our version of Islam was Rumi, even though we couldn't read books like you guys do. We didn't go to universities, but we knew who Hafiz was or Shirazi was. We learned philosophy through that. We learned, we were doing the fields during the day, but during the evening we were reading this stuff. Islam was in the air. We understood openness in our civilization. There were, we had tolerance. Right? We've lost that. But we can bring it back because it's part of our history, it's part of our culture.
I think the thing you kept mentioning throughout this podcast, was issue of confidence, right? I mean, we were talking about Sami Hamdi. You're one of the British brothers.
Yeah.
He's been on the podcast rounds, and I think a lot of his stuff is about having confidence and we have a good opinion of what's going to come, right? Yeah. How do we at a very practical, you can't. It's hard to infuse confidence in the masses, right? I mean, sometimes you do. Like Sammy will go on a platform and people will be empowered by it. But we were talking. We both have kids. We both have girls, all girls. Pragmatically, as dads, as fathers, what can we do to help our kids? As we wrap up here, confidence in our kids. Next generation, especially in South Asian culture, I feel like it's just maybe Arab culture too. Yeah. We always feel like, nothing's ever good enough. 98%, we'll have them 2%.
Yeah. So look, whenever you don't have a civilizational outlook in life, which is what we've lost.
Yep.
You cannibalize. Cannibalize means you start eating your own.
Okay.
This is what Muslims do, right? Instead of thinking about building, we just want to eat our own community. We attack our community, right?
Okay.
So what we need to do is have that awalan, which is what we had. This is what led to Islamic ascendancy, the empires, right? Yeah. And when you read their text, it's very clear.
Sure.
I can give you hundreds of examples, maybe a separate podcast. I'll bring books and I'll just show you.
Next year when you come back.
Inshallah, I'll bring all my books.
Yeah.
The best way to do this, wallahi, is modeling. Not that type of modeling, Habibi.
Yeah.
Right? You model it for your community. You model it for your children. What you are speaks more loud and more eloquently than what you say. So you have to model confidence. Where does that come from, though? I don't want superficial modeling. I want modeling that's based on ilm, based on depth.
Yeah.
When you have rusukh fil ilm, then you embody that. It's in your blood. You have that.
And that goes back to learning, though.
It goes back to learning. Of
Which
course,
you
if you know your tradition, if someone comes out with a batil idea, boom, smash it down straight away.
Right.
But if you don't know, you get defensive. If you don't know your history, you don't know your culture, people say Islam was spread by the sword. You're like, oh, okay, I need to get apologetic. But you come out with arguments, like the argument that I gave about, somebody said to me, well, what we're doing in Gaza and Palestine, or what we're doing in the Muslim lands and colonizing your lands, wasn't very different to what you did to our lands. No, it's a big difference. You guys were unanimously rejected.
Yeah.
You guys were kicked out of those lands.
Yeah.
You never enriched those communities. But what did we do? We're still there today.
Right.
It's like we've infused our culture into those places.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to have that confidence of explaining that. That comes through ilm. That comes then through embodiment. And when you embody it, people want it. People follow you. That's why the imam is important. The imam is someone who's cultured, who's learned, because when people see the imam at the front, Shah Waliullah Dehlavi talks about the first sub should be the elite. Because people, it's a psychological thing, right? When they talk about in the prayer, I'm just using the prayer as an example.
Yeah.
The prayer isn't just, the imam is someone that embodies prophetic traits. If you look in the books of fiqh, they say, afqah, a'lam, the most beautiful person, the most knowledgeable person. You know, let's not romanticize like those memes that go around about how the Ottoman imams were very well educated.
Yeah.
This is a reality. We need to lift expectation. And this goes back to your final point, which is about the final question about this idea of, you know, how do we do it? How does it work at a practical level? We need to challenge anyone who tries to bring our community down. We need to challenge negativity. We need to remove this idea. This is not prophetic. The Prophet never beat anyone down. Did he beat anyone down?
No.
So where does this come from? Right? Where does it come from? It's not part of our tradition. The Prophet loved people even when they were down. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Even when they were sad, he lifted the people. He inspired and motivated them. And so we need to lift the standards to which we hold ourselves. We should be the exemplars. We should reach a level where we are the ones who create the vaccines for COVID.
Right.
We are the ones who are not consumers, but we are the builders of everything. So people know us by what we build and what we do. And so we need to move away from like leaving ourselves with low standards, right? And this goes back to the early discussion about what you said about being organized.
Right.
And if shaitan is working overtime,
Yeah.
then shouldn't we be working harder?
Right.
Shouldn't we be making more effort, right?
Mm-hmm.
This dunya is not darul luxury. It's not hotel. It's not a place to relax. It's a place to do work. It's to do juhd. It's to strive. And there's also pleasure in that, right? Because when you're serving God, there's an aspect to it which is meaningful. When you have that, you have purposefulness. And I would say to Americans, my friends, brothers and sisters, Allah's given you wealth.
Yeah.
Allah's given you influence. Allah's given you so much. Use it. Fund scholarship. Fund people like me. So I can spend time writing and researching and doing the thinking for you while you're still working. So I don't have to work in some job where I'm working 9 to 5 and then you're all complaining that, you know, the ulama aren't producing books. Well, they're working all day. Scholarship, fund ulama, fund organization. Let's get together. Let's pool our resources together. Like what Muslims used to do in the past, right? They funded organizations which created some of the greatest minds, some of the greatest scholarly output. Where did that come from? Part of it was because Muslims as a society felt that they were part of that franchise. They were part of the scholarly class as well. Even though they weren't ulama themselves, they loved the ulama.
Right.
So these are some practical steps that we need to do in America or in Britain.
Jazakallah khair, Maulana Haroon. It was a real pleasure having you on. How can people learn more about you and the work you're doing?
Follow me on, how do you say it? Like, share.
Share, subscribe.
Yeah, follow me on YouTube. Reach out to me on Twitter, social media hub. Email me. You can find me. I'm always open for dialogue. Invite me to these platforms.
And your YouTube is Haroon Sidat?
Just type in Haroon Sidat, you'll find me.
Okay.
If they haven't blocked me after this one.
Okay.
And reach out, support us.
Yeah.
We're only as good as what the Muslim community support us with. So if you can do that and support ulama, support scholarship, support this channel with what you're doing, so we can get as many Muslims plugged in and engaged.
All right. From our listeners out there, if you have any questions or comments, you can email me at info@sultansandsneakers.com. Please like the video if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, leave a comment. If you're listening on the audio podcast apps, if you're on Apple, please leave a 5-star review and leave a 5-star review on Spotify or wherever else you are listening to this podcast. For my special guest, Maulana Haroon Sidat, I'm your host, Mahin the Podcaster, signing off. Assalamu alaikum.